So today was the day. We got the stream from CD Projekt Red, giving us details on the initial few DLCs for Cyberpunk, as well as a bit of a look at patch 1.3, this being the next large-scale update for the game, and in fact, the largest update the game will ever get. In the live stream, they showed off some of this. They also made some personal remarks about the development, disappointment around the game and its release, and just kind of gave some context in general. But in addition, we did get the full-fledged patch notes, which I also have read for this video. So more or less what I want to do here is start off, mention some of the things they went over in the stream, recap the stream, because I know don't want to watch the full hour-long stream, but then also go over what the DLCs are adding, some of the notable changes coming with this update, and lastly, some of the bug fixes. Some of these changes in the patch notes are actually pretty interesting. There's actually some cut content being re-added, although it's definitely on the smaller scale. Don't get crazy hype for that. So overall, as far as the stream itself went, they mentioned right off the bat that the stream is kind of an experiment. It seems like it might be something they do more of in the future, depending on how the first one goes. They immediately acknowledge how they have been quite quiet recently, and a lot of their communication hasn't been quite clear. This stream is an attempt to fix that, and even just mentioning how the game's launch didn't go as planned. There's a lot of disappointment out there, and even several employees at CDPR who were disappointed in launch. But they do appreciate those who have stuck with them and followed and supported the game. And I also think it's worth mentioning that this stream isn't like the high-level executives making the big decisions in the company. You're looking at a quest designer, a level designer, and 3 community managers. Cyberpunk 2077 releasing in a bugged state is not their fault. So as far as my own reaction to the stream, I'm a little bit mixed, because on one hand, I absolutely love content like this when you actually have developers of the game talking directly about changes and just giving context as to the whole process of managing and updating the game. But also, I feel like the stream was almost like misguided in some way. Like a lot of people were trying to see if Cyberpunk 2077 was getting fixed and after 8 months wouldn't be quite as broken anymore. And I feel like they just spent too much time focusing on like a cat change, where now your cat will wander around your apartment. The game still has a lot of lingering problems. We're not quite at the stage where we could be making jokes like that during the stream, at least in my opinion, where they highlighted how you could now make facial expressions in the mirror, but that was a feature that was actually broken by one of the past updates. So they just unbroke an aspect of the game, and again, there was just too much of a focus on that. I'm actually a bit more confident in this update after reading the patch notes, not after the stream. But at the same time, again, I love the dialogue, I love the communication around some of these features, and I do really hope we see more streams like this, and obviously something like this becomes increasingly easier as they add meatier and meatier things to the game, or have larger scale fixes, or even quality of life additions. Although I definitely feel like the stream would have been much better received, as it did get quite a big negative reception depending on where you looked, if they had focused more on some of the meatier things, like there's actually a piece of cut content getting re-added to the game. Maybe show off that instead of the cat, actually talk about how this is kind of the first wave of AI changes, and really spend a decent amount of time showing that off. Some of the improvements already implemented, discuss why maybe that's difficult, or where it's going next. The cat's cool, the jacket they're adding is cool, but it's starting off with those things I feel like was a bit of a mistake. One of the things they do talk about during the stream that I think is pretty interesting is they mention how certain things that at first glance seem pretty easy are actually a bit more complicated than you would think for a couple of reasons. So on one hand, a bunch of systems are interconnected, so with certain things like, let's say, changing attributes, they see that's a highly requested feature, but the way the game's designed, that's not quite as simple as people would think. And when you change that, it'll actually kind of have a ripple effect and impact many other things in the game. And at one point, they actually compared it to open heart surgery with impacting other parts of the body, which is not a good analogy to be making given the current situation, but even further, how they are maintaining this game on 6 platforms. And for me at least, I think that does provide some interesting insight. Obviously, the game had a ton of problems with launch on last-gen consoles, and it's not like those are just gone. When they're pushing updates to this game, although you could have a edited version for last-gen consoles, it's not like they've just abandoned them outright, so getting stuff to work over there is probably making the entire process a lot more lengthy and difficult compared to if it was just next-gen and PC exclusively. And further, as far as the whole system-to-system interacting, although I do sympathize with that explanation, at the same time, it's been 8 months. We're just finally now seeing the minimap be in a more functioning state in cars. That's one of those changes, even if it impacts other systems, you would have really hoped to see a lot earlier. But honestly, as a whole, I would actually say I really enjoyed this stream. I've seen some people just completely criticizing it. I'm not in that fence. Perhaps I'm one of the outliers there, but I enjoy hearing from the developers, even if at points I was kind of like, oh boy. There's also some bugs in the background on the stream, which is never a good sign. But at the same time, I do really hope this is something that continues. changes. Obviously, I want to continue to see the game improving, and at least when it comes to the patch notes itself, this is the biggest patch the game has ever gotten, and even further, which we'll see how true this ends up being, they do describe how they're kind of getting to the game at a point after this patch where they could focus a bit more on quality of life improvements, and specifically that's after this patch. It's another huge wave of bug fixes, so they could focus more on other things going forward. We also get further confirmation that work on expansions has begun, but we just get a minor mention of that. As far as the DLCs that were showed off, the way this is going to work is all 3 of these are free DLCs coming to the game, and it seems like they will actually be included with the update. So when you download patch 1.3, you'll just have to go into the additional content menu and turn on the DLCs. The first one we got is this multi-layered Sin leather Delta Jock jacket, as well as the luminescent Punk jacket. For this to actually activate and start, you'll have to have progressed past the point where you meet Dexter Deshawn, but from there, you're just going to get a text from Victor about a gift, and you'll actually find these 2 new jackets in your stash, and you can use them. It'll also give you the ability to craft them if you want to craft higher tier variants. So overall, a pretty small one. This jacket does look particularly cool in my eyes, but at the end of the day, I'm still going to wear whatever has the best stats, not what looks the coolest. The second DLC to me is actually a lot cooler. It's going to be the Archer Quartz Bandit. So depending on your choice during the Ghost Town quest, you'll have to actually buy this car, or you'll get it for free as a reward from the quest. So basically what decision you make around Panam during that quest. And honestly, I think this car looks really cool. Of course, this is not a totally new car, but it's actually taking the existing quartz, of which there are 2 separate models you can get in game, and making a 3rd edited version of it. But to me, visually, this is actually quite a significant change. The car is pretty quick. It's not one of the fastest cars in the game, but you do see it get up to around 170, which makes it one of the faster cars in general. And I would say the overall design is quite different from what we have already, and just in general, I think looks pretty cool. That I'll definitely be using this DLC. I like this one. This is one of the few points during the stream where my expectations were actually exceeded. I was just expecting some skin on the course, but this is definitely a bit further than that, and I think, again, a really cool one. Then last but not least, we do just have a skin for Johnny Silverhand. That with Johnny Silverhand's alternate appearance. This is one of those things where I feel like I would normally describe it as polarizing, but that would require me to have actually heard somebody that does like it, and I haven't seen anyone actually like this one. I think it looks way worse than Johnny Silverhand's original appearance. It almost kind of gives you like edgy MGK vibes, but at the end of the day, it really is just a reskin of Johnny Silverhand. It's a completely optional free DLC, and one that I definitely won't be using. So again, to make it abundantly clear, these 3 DLCs are launching with patch 1.3, and they're totally free. There's no payment required. I think they're actually just going to be added to your game with the download, so you just literally have to go in the menu and activate them. There's some people disappointed that this is all we're getting, a couple of new jackets, a new car, and a new look for Johnny, and although I understand being disappointed with the patch overall, being disappointed by these free DLCs to me just doesn't make much sense. It's pretty clear these were going to be small DLCs. We knew they were kind of copying the format of the Witcher DLCs, and the Witcher DLCs were also reskins of characters and very minor. So if you're expecting something much bigger than this, I think you may have just had the wrong expectations. This is what most people were expecting as far as I can tell, and actually what I speculated we would get in a video. If you didn't see that video, all of these DLCs leaked a few weeks ago, and obviously that leak was proven correct by their reveal because all of these are on that leaked document. I'll have a link to that in the little eye, but now we do actually have an idea as to what the next DLCs will be, and they also do clarify during the stream that some of the DLCs down the line will be somewhat larger than these, although many will be quite as small. Now going on to the patch notes, these are quite meaty. They go over some of the changes during the stream, but I would even argue that not some of the biggest or most notable changes were covered during the stream, although it still isn't really a crazy patch I think it's worth reinstalling or starting a totally new playthrough for. So of course, one of the things we saw already, they improved the minimap zoom level while you're driving. This is one of the ones where they go into discussing how this is actually a lot more difficult for them to do than it would initially appear. You think, okay, you just kind of raise the minimap, but to do that, you actually have to stream the area around you, which if you're raising it means you have to stream more of the area around you. This in particular for consoles could come at a performance loss. They don't really have much performance to lose on consoles, so that becomes a problem. I know though, I do sympathize with that. I can understand how impacting one thing or trying to make a change to one thing can kind of have this ripple effect and in turn potentially break other things, or there's a lot of other systems you have to worry about. But at the same time, it's not like it's been a month. It still has been 8 months since release. This is still a relatively small change, even if it was on the more difficult side to just be coming out now. And even comparing Cyberpunk Cyberpunk 2077 to other games out there, the patching just has been much slower, and making some of these what seem like minor changes are so difficult, that could just be reflective of the code base they're working with overall. One that was a surprise, but is actually kind of a nice quality of life change, is they increased the number of slots for autosaves from 10 to 20 and quick saves from 3 to 10. When you screw up or make a bad decision, you'll have more options to roll back to. You can now actually upgrade craftable components in bulk. This is a huge one. If you actually devoted time into crafting, it would typically take so long to do this. When they added bulk crafting, I don't understand how they didn't add it to this. I'm happy it's finally here. Definitely way too late. This should have been added ages ago. We're actually getting the optical camo cyberware. This is that piece of cut content that is finally coming. You'll be able to purchase it from Ripperdocs. Mods had already added this one in. It was actually in a piece of dialogue in Cyberpunk, but you couldn't actually get it until this update.
But if you spend a lot of time in the Badlands, it's worth investing in cloaking gear. Hollow skin, active camo, what have you.
And basically, it'll just cloak you and allow you to kind of get up closer to enemies or use stealth. Obviously, you don't know exactly how it's going to work, but it'll likely have several tiers and some version of that. As they spent probably too much time focusing on during the stream, there are now several sleeping spots for Nibbles in V's apartment. They mentioned during the stream how this patch would actually kick off a series of AI improvements and tweaks. So we're going to see the initial version of that this time, and it should get better and better with subsequent patches. And there's a variety of changes around this. They make it so the detection time of enemies now actually depends on the game difficulty. So if you're on easier difficulty, enemies will take a longer time to detect you when you're sneaking around. On very hard, it'll be faster, and also on very hard exclusively, enemies will be more aggressive when searching for you. So once they actually do find you, but perhaps lose line of sight, they will continue searching for you more aggressively. The AI during a myriad of boss fights and even some cyber psycho battles has been improved, and there's even some improvements to the miscellaneous AI in the world. NPCs will no longer react by crouching to every gunshot, fixed an issue where some NPCs wouldn't run away from combat scenes. Traffic will now honk after it hits you. Okay, that one's kind of small. NPCs will no longer keep hiding in cover after being flanked. And there's even some, although minor, changes to the NCPD. They'll no longer become hostile just because there's dead bodies in the open world, and if you hit an NPC with a non-lethal weapon, the cops will react to that. So pretty small. That's honestly not that big of an overhaul around this at all. I would actually say those difficulty changes are the most exciting, but still not really something that's going to get me playing the game again. Something I am happy to see is they actually did a bit of at least initial buffing with this patch. So Jackie's pistol will be slightly buffed. They did some balance changes with the contagion quick hack. The game obviously needs way more balance changes than just those two, but hey, it's at least somewhat of a start. One that actually is kind of a cool change is around crafting. They improved the crafting system so that items with random quality scale their quality with players' crafting skill. It's not possible anymore to roll a quality exceeding that of the relevant crafting skill. So we're going to need to test this more in game when the update actually drops. But right now, when crafting things like, let's say, a armor or weapon mod, like the armadillo mod, the way it works is it'll actually craft different variants, and you'll have a random chance at, let's say, getting a common or an uncommon. The higher the tier, the more of a bonus it'll give you. But that actually had basically nothing to do with your actual crafting perks or crafting stat. And it was just determined by your overall level. So the higher your in-game level, and this being literally your character level, the more variants you could unlock. So like, let's say you were over 20, then you could start crafting rare variants. Over level 30, you might sometimes start seeing epic variants, etc. It was this really weird system that I feel like the game never introduced to you, and what I'm guessing is this change is going to instead tie that to the crafting skill system, and hopefully should make the whole thing a lot more predictable. So kind of a niche corner of the game. I know a lot of people didn't even get that deep into crafting, but if you were into it, this is kind of a cool change, assuming it works how I'm assuming. Further now, when you're actually upgrading weapons, it'll have the level requirement of the weapon also upgrade, so you can upgrade things past your level requirement. It'll remain equipped, but if you de-equip it, you will not be able to use it until you hit that level. They added more crafting recipes for cyberware, as well as now you could actually craft knives from the start of the game, as well as there's some balance changes around this. Some things got more expensive to craft, notably some of the healing items, which were probably a bit too cheap in the past, although I feel like a lot of people also, again, weren't getting too deep into that aspect of the crafting system. system. You can now actually move V around in the inventory menu by using your mouse. There's a couple of new animations. There's actually a new animation if you kill an enemy with short circuit, but also an animation for picking up and dumping bodies in vehicle trunks. You can now actually double jump during holo calls, and this perhaps being one of the biggest of the more notable features, when Judy tells you she gives you a gift, you'll actually be able to find a gift in V's apartment. We don't know what this gift is going to be, but this is like this weird mystery with the game where if you progress down the Judy tree, she would just text you one day, hey, I left a gift for you, but you don't actually know what it is. There doesn't seem to be anything different. I'm guessing they just forgot to actually give you a gift, but now you'll get one. You can find like pages of threads online arguing back and forth as to what the gift supposedly was. Some of the notable quality of life stuff that was added, they actually added database links to journal entries now. They showed this off during the stream, so you get some of that background lore for some of the quests you're doing. I actually think this is kind of a cool one. Relatively minor, but definitely interesting for establishing the world lore overall. Fixers will now message V less often about purchasing a car. They added a filter for quest items in the backpack, which is really convenient. There's going to be a comparison tooltip for cyberware now, so you can compare cyberware against each other. They adjusted the damaging process when shooting crowd NPCs while you're already in combat. So seemingly if you accidentally miss and fire some bullets into a crowd, it's not going to negatively impact you as much. The PC version's mouse cursor is apparently more compact and overall better performance. The fixes mentioned with this update in the patch notes are definitely the bulkiest part. I tried to highlight some of the most notable ones, but trust me, there are literally hundreds. I'm not going to be talking about all of them. They finally patched the painting exploit where you could sell it and then get it back for very cheap and then sell it for more money. So I'll have a moment of silence for the fact that that has finally been removed. And also, they finally fixed several perks. As I mentioned earlier, they were aware of this document going around on Reddit of some of the perks that just straight up don't work, and although they haven't comprehensively addressed things, they did fix at least 6 perks. And this is definitely one of those ones for me where I'm like, okay, I'm definitely happy we got some fixes on the way, but it's been 8 months. Can we not have all the perks work? I feel like we're past this point, or at least we definitely should be past this point. They fixed a bug where you would go to a clothing store and certain crafting specs would only be available the first time. So once you left and came back, they would just be gone. V no longer looks down after using fast travel. There's this weirdness with screen space reflections that's got some patches in the past, but now things will look less grainy on consoles, and if you're using a lower visual setting on PC, in particular for consoles, that graininess fix should be actually kind of big. They fixed an issue where V would get launched into the air when attempting to jump through or climb various terrains throughout Night City. There's definitely a lot of videos of people abusing this and actually having what looked like a lot of fun using this in the past, so it'll be interesting to see how much has been changed. Gold iconic loot will now be displayed on the mini-map. They fixed various map holes you could find around the map, so literal holes in the map. They fixed multiple issues with objects popping in. They fixed that faulty pathing for vehicles in the city center ring road, so they would just literally smash into the wall and clip through the wall. Thank God that was fixed. That was just kind of an embarrassing aspect of this game. And actually going through and counting them, they have 57 individual quests and 28 gigs that have specific fixes. So 57 different quests got fixes with this update. It's definitely a meteor one. If you are having bugs before this update or waiting for the game to be even more bug-free, this is probably the biggest batch of fixes we've seen thus far. Obviously, we have to test what things are like when this update goes live, but at least on paper, this is looking pretty promising. And the biggest one, ladders no longer read as turned on when you scan them. So overall, looking at this update, or at least how it looks on paper, and looking at the stream and all of the new announcements, it's kind of exactly what I was expecting. More of a focus on bug fixes, but slowly creeping their way more into the quality of life improvements. They mentioned how it seems like kind of after this update or going forward, they're much happier with the overall state of the game. So we'll start to see more and more quality of life improvements and other feature fixes per se. But to me, it does feel like another one of those updates that, hey, if you are waiting to jump into Cyberpunk, this is probably a pretty good time actually, if everything does come to fruition, no glaring issues with this one. But if you already played it, I don't really see much reason to come back. Like, those DLCs are cool, but they're definitely not worth a new playthrough. I'm not reinstalling the game for a couple of jackets and a car that I think looks really cool, but maybe you don't even end up getting until halfway through a playthrough. But it definitely seems like this is going to be one of those updates that does deliver on the bug fixing side. The last one was definitely disappointing, and this one is a lot meatier. I'm happy happy to see Cyberpunk getting its biggest update ever. It took 8 months. I really wish it didn't take that long, but hopefully this puts to bed a lot of those rumors or people complaining that the game was getting abandoned, even though there really wasn't much evidence of that, just a slow patch schedule. With that said, there is something else to look forward to. It is not all grim. One, if you've never played Cyberpunk 2077, you can actually get the game for $10 if you're watching this video right around when it goes live. At Best Buy, they're selling the console copy. It has to be a physical copy, but it is literally $10, which for $10, I would say it is probably worth getting this game, especially if you're playing on a next-gen console. But even further, we know that this thing called Megamod is actually coming out in the not-too-distant future. They do cite it releasing on August 20th, but obviously I think depending on the dropping of patch 1.3, that could be modified slightly. Megamod being the biggest ever mod to come to Cyberpunk 2077, and almost in a way kind of like a fan-made overhaul, fixing a lot of the lingering issues, rebalancing a ton of stuff, and really we don't even know how much it's going to do, but it's going to do a lot. So that's something to look forward to. I'll definitely be covering that. I'll be covering patch 1.3 when it comes out, and with that said, hopefully you guys found this one informative. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.